Sergeant Mark Doyle slammed on his brakes in a pounding rainstorm, yanking Nathan Cole, a calm black driver, out of his car and threatening to haul him to jail. What Doyle didn't know, Nathan is the newly appointed police commissioner, quietly testing the very system Doyle abuses. Will Doyle's unchecked prejudice end his own career when the truth breaks through the storm? If this clash of power and justice gripped you already, hit like and share so others can join the conversation. Now let's step into this night of shocking revelations. I remember the rain first. It didn't fall so much as hammer the street, rinsing Riverton in sheets of silver and noise. Thunder rolled somewhere off the river, and the wind drove water down the empty block like it had a score to settle. I ducked under the awning of a corner convenience store, the kind that keeps the lights too bright and the coffee too old just to wait the storm out. That's when I saw the black sedan ease through the intersection wipers, dragging slow arcs. The driver steady, unhurried, like someone who knew bad nights and didn't plan to add to this one. He was a black man in a gray suit. Later I'd learn his name, Nathan Cole, and a whole lot more about him than I expected to know about any stranger. But in that first moment, I only registered the quiet on his face. There was weight behind it, the kind of weight you get from years of holding your breath through meetings where everyone smiles and nothing changes. He turned his head once, eyes checking mirrors like a habit more than a fear, and rolled up to the curb near the store. That's when the blue and reds detonated behind him. The patrol car didn't just pull up, it lunged, nose-heavy tires skidding a little as it boxed the sedan to the curb. The siren barked a short, angry blast that cut through the rain. I flinched. So did the cashier inside. The door of the cruiser flew open and a cop stepped into the downpour, like the storm belonged to him. Sergeant Mark Doyle, white mid-30s, the kind of jaw that looks carved until the temper in it starts to shake. His hand already sat on the butt of his gun, like it lived there. Water soaked his uniform in seconds, but he didn't notice or didn't care. He planted his boots, leaned toward the driver's window, and snapped through the rain. Step out of the car now. The tone did all the hitting that his hands hadn't done yet. The sedan's window hummed down. The man in the gray suit didn't flinch. His voice, when it came, was soft but clean, like a line drawn with a good pen. Is there a reason for this stop suspicious behavior? Possible stolen vehicle. Doyle shot it back like he'd rehearsed it, like the words were a rubber stamp he didn't need to ink anymore. The storm hissed between them. From the passenger side of the cruiser, a second door opened, more careful this time. Officer Ryan Bell, younger, black hair, plastered to his forehead, stepped out and kept a respectful distance behind his sergeant. He scanned the sedan the way rookies do, methodical, careful, swallowing the urge to overperform. His gaze snagged on the driver's chest for half a heartbeat, then flicked away. The man Nathan, though we didn't know his name yet, raised both hands where the cops could see them and reached down slowly. He moved like someone used to translating for people with guns, every action, a sentence with a subject, a verb, and no room for misunderstanding. He pulled a wallet from his jacket. As he did, a silver badge flashed at the edge of an inside pocket, catching a stray lick of fluorescence from the store sign. I caught it. Ryan Bell caught it too. I saw his eyes widen, then shudder. Doyle didn't notice, or maybe he refused to. He clicked on his flashlight and raked that beam across the man's face, then the steering wheel, then the console, like he was hunting for a reason to be right. Men like you always find trouble at night. He said the words tasting like old metal. One wrong move and you'll spend the night in a cell. The rain got louder. Funny how storms do that, how they hear a challenge and throw their weight around. Nathan's expression didn't change. His breathing stayed even. If he felt the insult, he buried it under something steadier. He eased the wallet toward the window with 2 fingers. License and registration, he said. Both current. Doyle didn't take them yet. He leaned closer, letting the flashlight bloom across Nathan's eyes. I could see the pupils contract, could imagine the sting. From under my awning, I felt my jaw lock in that useless way bystanders do, anger with nowhere to go. Inside the glass, the cashier set a hand on the phone like it was a talisman. Bell shifted behind his Sergeant Rain, slicking down his face neck tight. He stole another look at that glint of silver in the jacket, and I watched a war begin in his shoulders, duty twisting against fear, recognition pushing against rank. He opened his mouth, shut it, swallowed. Out of the vehicle, Doyle ordered. Hands where I can see them. Nathan's door clicked. He stepped into the rain with the same controlled grace he'd used for everything else. He was taller than I thought. The suit fit like it had been chosen to make no statement at all. He stood in the wash of the cruiser's lights, palms open at shoulder height, and the water ran off him in small rivers. I couldn't hear his heartbeat, but I felt the room it must have taken up in his chest. "What's a man like you doing in a car like this?" Doyle said, and there it was, the thing behind the stop, finally standing in the open with muddy shoes. Driving home, Nathan answered, "Is that a crime tonight?" The way he said it, calm, almost conversational, only seemed to sharpen Doyle. The sergeant's mouth thinned. His hand never left the gun. He stepped in close, too close to the flashlight, now an accusation all its own. Around us, the street began to populate with watchers. Rain brings people to doorways and under awnings to bus stops to whatever small shelter they can find. Phones appeared like a second kind of weather. Red dots blinked. Cameras rose. Not a crowd yet, but enough witnesses to tilt the air. "Silence won't save you," Doyle murmured low enough that maybe he meant it for Nathan alone, and loud enough that the whole block heard it. "I can make your night very long." For a second, Nathan's eyes went somewhere else. Not away, just inward, as if he were practicing letting anger pass through without catching. If you've ever watched a surgeon steady his hands, you've seen that look. When he spoke again, his voice was almost gentle. It already has. The rain rounded that line, polished it, and sent it back along the sidewalk. I felt it in my teeth. Bell took a breath. "Sarge," he started quiet, careful stepping a fraction forward, like a man approaching a skittish animal. Maybe Doyle cut him off without looking. "I've got this." The license still sat in Nathan's raised hand. The registration fluttered in the wind plastic sleeve, catching droplets that made it blur. Doyle finally snatched them, flicked his eyes across the card without reading, then handed both back like they weren't evidence of anything he had to respect. "Turn around," he said. "Hands behind your back." It was too fast and also not sudden at all. Every second had been walking this way since the lights lit up the street. Nathan didn't argue. He scanned the faces mine. The cashiers, the two teenagers pressed into the bodega's doorway, a woman holding a folded umbrella like a shield. I don't know what he was looking for. Maybe just proof that the world was real and watching. Behind Doyle Bell's jaw worked. He looked at Nathan's jacket again, at the flash of that silver badge peeking and hiding with the rain, and his throat clicked like a stalled engine. He hesitated half a heartbeat longer, then fell back into line. Fear is heavier up close. Doyle reached for his cuffs. Before metal touched skin, a car hissed past at the far corner, its reflection smearing the cruiser's lights into a long wound across the pavement. Thunder rolled again closer, now hurrying the scene along like a drumline. Someone near me whispered, "Record it," and someone else said, "I am." Nathan exhaled. Not a surrender, more like the measured breath of a man counting to keep his balance. The kind of breath that says, "I've been here before, and if I haven't, I've rehearsed it anyway." He turned out, letting the rain own his face, his shoulders, the back of his neck. He put his hands where Doyle wanted them, wrists aligned, fingers uncurled. No drama, no plea. The cuffs clicked. You can tell yourself that sound is all mechanics, steel and spring, and a small lever finding home. But on nights like that, it's a verdict. It rides your spine. It draws a line in the story that everything behind it has to answer for. The phones rose higher. The cashier stepped out from behind the counter. The teenagers leaned forward like you do when you can't help rubbernecking disaster. Bell looked down then, up then at Doyle, then at Nathan, and for a heartbeat I thought he might reach just one hand out to interrupt the gravity of the moment. He didn't. He stood there in the rain and let the night harden. Doyle's chin lifted a notch, the posture of a man who believes the law is whatever he says it is, particularly when the sky is dark and the block is empty. He angled Nathan toward the cruiser with a pressure that stopped just short of a shove. "Walk," he said, and we watched them do exactly that, the sergeant guiding the man in cuffs, moving with the strangest kind of dignity, and the rookie shadowing, both carrying a question so big it made his shoulders look too small. The storm drove on. Somewhere behind us, the convenience store's cooler hummed like a patient machine. The street smelled of wet asphalt and something electric like the moment before a wire arcs. I didn't know Nathan's name then. I didn't know Bell's either. I only knew what anyone with eyes and ears knew, that a black man in a gray suit had been pulled from his car on a wet, empty street, threatened for a crime he hadn't committed, and bound in front of strangers who would go home with the sound of that metal in their heads. I knew, too, that for a blink of time, a silver badge had flashed where badges don't usually hide, and a young cop had seen it and swallowed his voice. The rest, the truth heavy enough to tilt a career, a precinct, maybe a city was coming. But in that first hard chapter under that angry sky, all we had was rain light and a line a man refused to cross, even with cuffs on. Before the cuffs, there was a moment on the sidewalk that stretched longer than the rain. Doyle had yanked the door open and marched Nathan Cole out, planting him on the slick concrete just past the gutter. The cruiser's lights spun blue and red across his face, painting calm in one color and accusation in the other. Nathan stood there, shoulders squared, palms open, like a man who knew the drill and hated that he knew it. People drifted out of doorways and bus stops, pulled by sirens the way tide follows the moon. A couple under a shared coat whispered, "Why him? He wasn't speeding." Phones rose tiny red dots, winking to life. You could feel the street change temperature, warmer from the bodies, colder from what they were about to witness. Doyle closed the distance until the rain from his brim tapped Nathan's cheek. He snapped his flashlight on and drove the beam straight into Nathan's eyes. "What's a man like you doing in a car like this?" The line came out casual, but it wasn't a question. It was a verdict dressed as curiosity. Nathan didn't blink. His voice stayed level, a low note in the noise. "Driving home. Is that a crime tonight?" You could hear the cut in it. Not sharp enough to bleed, but enough to let the truth through. Behind Doyle, Officer Ryan Bell shifted rain threading off his jaw. His gaze dipped to Nathan's jacket, right where I'd seen it, catching again that thin silver badge peeking from the inner pocket there, and gone with the wind. Recognition flared in his eyes, then collided with something heavier. I watched him swallow, and I swear I could hear the memory land. Doyle's old promise hissed in a locker room or a parking lot. "I'll bury your career if you ever cross me." Fear doesn't need many words, it just needs the right voice. Doyle eased the flashlight closer until it was practically a brand. "Silence won't save you," he said, softer now, more dangerous. "I can make your night very long." The rain seemed to hush for that. Nathan didn't fold. He breathed in once steady and answered like he was laying a card he'd kept clean for years. "It already has." The crowd heard it. So did Doyle. It landed like an insult and a prayer at the same time. A woman near me lowered her phone an inch, as if to honor the sentence. Then she raised it again, because nights like this don't forgive unrecorded moments. "Hands higher," Doyle barked, and Nathan obliged, raising his palms until the tendons in his wrists made small shadows under the streetlight. He didn't flinch when the flashlight bobbed up and down his suit, over his belt, across his shoes. He didn't look away from Doyle either. There's a kind of refusal that looks like eye contact. He had that. Bell cleared his throat. It was a small sound, but it cut the rain for me. He stepped in half a pace. Sarge quiet, careful, like approaching a ledge. Doyle didn't turn. "Hold position," he said, and then to Nathan. "Where were you tonight? Who were you meeting?" Nathan didn't answer. Not out of arrogance, out of calculation. I could feel it from the awning, his choice to let Doyle build the record himself. The silence between them swelled until you could stack boxes on it. "See," Doyle said to the air, to the cameras, to his own certainty. Non-compliant. A teenager down the block muttered, "He's doing exactly what he's told," and an older man shushed him with a hand that had done that gesture too many times. Bell looked at me without seeing me, then at Doyle, then at that sliver of silver again. He knew. He absolutely knew. But knowledge without cover is just a weight, and Doyle's shadow was long. Nathan's eyes flicked once to the onlookers, just a glance to remind himself there were witnesses that the world existed outside of this circle of light and water. When he returned to Doyle, his face had that quiet again, the kind that can feel like defiance if you need it to. The storm wrapped the scene in white noise. Somewhere a bus hissed, doors closing, then sighed away like it wanted no part of this. Doyle dropped the flashlight a fraction, and his mouth flattened into a line that meant he'd made his decision before he ever stepped out of the car. He leaned in, voice dropping into the place men save for threats and confessions. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to keep those hands where I can see them. You're going to answer when I ask. And if you don't, you will learn how long a night can be. Nathan's answer didn't rise or crack. I've learned that already. It wasn't bravado. It was biography. The street went tight as a wire. Thunder rolled a beat closer like a drum checking its timing. The phones lifted higher. Even the cashier at the convenience store had drifted to the door apron, still on his thumb, hovering over 911. He'd already dialed twice and never sent. Bell took one more step, the smallest rebellion, and angled himself so he could speak without the camera catching more than his profile. Sarge, he tried again. Just air and courage, we should. Enough, Doyle snapped, still not looking back. I said hold. And then, as if to prove the night belonged only to him, he raised the flashlight once more and set its circle on Nathan's chest, right where the silver glint hid and reappeared with the rain. For a heartbeat, Doyle's light and that secret metal met. Bell saw it. I saw him see it. He inhaled like a man about to jump. He didn't jump. The moment passed slippery as the curb. The tension didn't. It stretched across us all, the sergeant's power, the crowd's outrage, the rookie's knowledge, the man's restraint. We stood in it, soaked through, while the question at the center of the night refused to answer itself. Who exactly had Doyle decided he was dealing with? And what would it cost to find out? It wasn't loud, but the kind of quiet that means there's no door left to open. Nathan Cole turned. No flinch, no plea, just a measured pivot rein, striping his suit's shoulders squared to the night. He lifted his wrists behind him, palms open as if surrender could be arranged without giving anything away. The cuffs clicked sharp and small, and the sound cut straighter than the siren had. Metal on bone, law on flesh. It carried under the awnings and through the glass of the corner store. I felt it in my molars. Sarge, maybe we should. Officer Ryan Bell tried stepping in on a tide of nerve. I know what I'm doing. Doyle's sliced back eyes never leaving Nathan. The words were a lid clamped on a boiling pot. A black woman across the street threw her voice over the rain. This isn't right. It rang truer than anything else we'd heard. Phones lifted higher. Someone called out the time for the record. The storm seemed to lean closer, hungry for clarity it wasn't going to get. Nathan didn't answer the woman or Doyle or the storm. He stood in the posture of a man refusing to be rearranged even while his hands were pinned. His face calm still didn't say I give up. It said something like wait. If silence can be a statement, he signed it in triplicate. Doyle took Nathan by the forearm, not rough, not gentle official. He tilted his chin, the royalty of small kings, and started them moving. Walk, he ordered. They stepped off the curb. Water sheeted over the grate. Ripples bent red and blue into a long bruise along the gutter. Each step landed heavy a drum beat. The street picked up and passed along our shoes. People made room the way crowds do, a parting couched in conscience and curiosity. Bell shadowed them, jaw-working eyes stuck to the back of Nathan's jacket, right where that silver glint had hidden. If he was going to speak, this was where the sentence should have started. It didn't. He carried his knowledge like a weight strapped tight across the chest. Keep the camera on a teenager, whispered to his friend. All of it. The friend nodded, rain purling on the screen like static. Doyle's hand stayed at Nathan's elbow, guiding, asserting. He didn't push. He didn't have to. Power that believes itself natural doesn't shove. It arranges. He flicked a glance at the crowd, then let the look sharpen into something like triumph. You could tell he thought the night belonged to him, and in a way it did. He had the cuffs. Nathan's shoes slid once corrected. He looked down at the water, then up at the cruiser, then past it, just a breath past it, like a man checking a horizon only he could see. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The proof would come, and he understood the cost of letting it arrive on its own feet. I wanted to shout. Lots of us did. The woman who'd cried, "This isn't right," pressed a palm to her chest as if to keep the heart where it belonged. The cashier stood in the doorway, apron wet, phone still in his hand, an unfinished 911 glowing on the screen. They reached the cruiser. Doyle opened the rear door with a practiced pull. For a second, everything paused, the storm. The lights, even the phone, seemed to steady like the night knew it was drawing a line that couldn't be undrawn. Watch your head, Doyle said, curt courtesy, all procedure. Nathan bent without breaking. As he did, he turned his face just enough for the crowd to see him fully, no flinch, no fear, only that composed refusal. It hit me that some men shout to keep their dignity. This one had found another way. The door thudded shut. The sound folded the scene in half. Bell stood there with his hands useless at his sides, the truth he'd seen beating at his ribs. Doyle squared his shoulders to the rest of us like a curtain call, then walked around the bumper toward the driver's seat, certain the story was already his. It wasn't. But on that wet block, with the cuffs fresh and the engine ticking, none of us could prove it yet. We only had to rein the cameras in a silence that had started to feel like a fuse. The squad car pulled away from the curb with a heavy hiss of wet tires, the siren off. Now just the steady thrum of rain on the roof. Inside, the air felt tighter than the cuffs on Nathan Cole's wrists. From the driver's seat, Sergeant Mark Doyle kept his jaw locked and his tone sharper than the wiper blades slicing back and forth. Big car, fancy suit, same trouble. He muttered each word, a pebble pitched over his shoulder. Guys like you always think you're different. Night like this proves me right every time. Nathan didn't rise to the bait. He leaned back against the seat, eyes on the blur of light streaking past the window. The city smeared into colors and memory. In that restless mirror of glass and water, faces came back to him, the fellow officer shot by mistake during a raid, a friend whose name became a headline before the facts were known. Meetings in polished offices where people smiled and whispered token when they thought he couldn't hear. For a flicker of a moment, he truly wondered, if all those years of policy fights and patient reforms had been for nothing. Have I built anything that survives a night like this? The thought stung sharper than Doyle's voice, but another voice older and steadier rose to meet it. His father's long gone, but never far justice isn't loud, but it never misses. Nathan breathed that in. The car smelled of wet nylon and the faint iron of handcuffs, but beneath it he caught the familiar weight of his own resolve. That quiet sentence had carried him through hearings, protests, late-night negotiations. It would carry him now. Up front, Officer Ryan Bell kept glancing into the rear view. The dashboard lights painted his face in pulses of blue and green. He saw more than a man in cuffs back there. He'd glimpsed the silver badge and felt what it meant. His thumb hovered near the radio mic. One press could call the watch, "Commander, bring a supervisor who outranked Doyle, maybe end this fast." But memory hit like a seatbelt snap. Doyle's warning from months ago, low and deadly in the locker room. You call anyone over my head, and you're done in this precinct. I'll bury your career before lunch. Ryan's hand trembled, then slid back to the wheel. The shame of it made his ears burn. The only sound left was the wipers. Swipe, pause, swipe. Each stroke felt like a countdown no one had set, but everyone heard. Rain hammered the roof harder, the rhythm turning into a slow drum that seemed to mark time until something, truth, rage, justice, finally broke through. Nathan turned his head slightly, catching Ryan's eyes in the mirror. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The look said enough, you know what's right. The question is when you'll choose it. Doyle either missed the exchange or refused to notice. He leaned an elbow on the door and kept talking to fill the dark. You think that suit means anything? Out here it's just cloth. The street decides who you are. Nathan let the words pass like weather. He had faced storms bigger than Doyle's temper. Tonight he was letting the truth do its slow, patient work. Outside, Riverton's streets streamed by in a blur of neon and rainwater. Inside, the squad car felt like a sealed box of pressure and silence, each heartbeat and wiper stroke, another tick toward a reckoning that no one could yet name, but everyone inside could feel coming. The squad car rolled to a stop with a squeal of wet brakes. Sergeant Mark Doyle killed the engine and shoved his door open. Cold rain followed him inside as he yanked open the rear door and ordered out. I followed with my eyes from the sidewalk across the street. The building ahead, Riverton's central precinct, stood like a bunker against the storm, all concrete and old grudges. Its glass doors hissed when they opened, and then slammed shut behind them, the sound slicing the night. The sudden silence on the street felt like the world exhaling after a held breath. Inside, the air was a different kind of cold. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a hard white glare on every surface. The lobby smelled of disinfectant and wet coats. You could hear each drop of rain falling from their jackets onto the tile. That sterile brightness made every shadow look guilty. Doyle kept his grip on Nathan Cole's arm, steering him past a row of empty chairs to a metal interview table. Name and ID, now, he barked, his voice echoing off the cinderblock walls. Nathan lowered himself into the chair with deliberate calm, the cuffs clinking once against the steel. He didn't rush. He reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out his wallet, setting it on the table with quiet precision. As he slid it open, a silver badge slipped free, landing face up in the harsh light. The badge didn't flash so much as command attention, a polished emblem marked with the city seal and a single word that seemed to expand in the room: Commissioner. From where I stood behind the glass partition, I caught Officer Ryan Bell's reaction first. His eyes widened, the pulse in his neck jumped. He knew exactly what that insignia meant. The commissioner had been confirmed only a week ago. Ryan had skimmed the memo himself, probably over his morning coffee. Now here it was, gleaming on the table between raindrops. He swallowed hard, the sound almost loud in the hush, and darted a look toward the entrance. That's when Lieutenant Grace Miller appeared, the officer in charge of the night shift. She stepped out of the side hallway with a clipboard in the calm of someone used to bad midnights, but the scene froze her mid-step. She scanned Doyle's rigid back, the cuffed man's steady eyes, and then Ryan, who was staring at her like a drowning man spotting a rope. Grace's brow tightened. She didn't speak yet, just moved closer, reading the room with the quiet accuracy of a seasoned cop. Doyle, meanwhile, barely glanced at the badge. He flicked it with a dismissive look and snapped, "That's nothing. Keep going." The confidence in his voice wasn't strength. It was the kind of certainty that grows when someone has lived too long without being questioned. Nathan said nothing. He didn't correct the insult or explain the badge. His silence thickened the air, turning the room itself into a witness. You could almost hear it like a pressure building behind the walls. Ryan shifted his weight, caught between duty and the memory of Doyle's whispered threat. "Call anyone over my head, and you're done in this precinct." His fingers twitched near the radio on his belt, then curled into a fist. He looked back at Grace with eyes that begged her to see what he'd seen. Grace met his gaze, and something unspoken passed between them, a question, an alarm, maybe a plan. The hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too loud. Even the rain against the windows fell into a strange, watchful rhythm. Doyle mistook the silence for compliance. "That's right," he said flatly, as if Nathan's quiet proved him right. He planted both hands on the table, leaning close. "This will go easier if you stop playing games." Nathan's only answer was a level stare. He didn't lean back. He didn't blink. It was the kind of silence that feels like a choice, not an absence. Every second of it pulled the room tighter. You could almost feel the truth waiting just beyond Doyle's reach, a presence pressing in until even the light seemed to flicker with it. Grace stepped nearer, her shoes soft on the tile. She didn't speak yet. She was watching, weighing, listening for the right moment to break the night open. And Nathan sat perfectly still in the cold fluorescent glow, his quiet becoming the loudest thing in the precinct. The precinct room felt smaller than it had a minute ago. Rain thudded on the windows in slow, heavy drops, but inside it was the silence that carried weight. Sergeant Mark Doyle planted his hands on the metal table and leaned in until his shadow spilled across Nathan Cole. "Where were you tonight? Who were you meeting?" Doyle's voice snapped like a wet rope. Each question came faster, trying to fill the quiet. Nathan sat straight, wrists still cuffed in front of him. He didn't so much as tilt his head. His eyes stayed steady, calm, unreadable. It wasn't defiance in the usual sense. It was something colder, a patience that made every word Doyle threw at him feel small. The longer Nathan stayed silent, the more the room seemed to amplify it. You could hear the fluorescent buzz, the soft tick of the wall clock, the faint hiss of rain against the glass. Each sound only made the quiet between them heavier. "Don't play games with me," Doyle warned, voice dropping into a low growl. "I can keep you here all night if I have to." Nathan's breathing didn't change. Behind Doyle, Officer Ryan Bell shifted his weight, the soles of his boots squeaking on the damp tile. He'd been silent for too long, and it showed. He stepped closer, the tension in his jaw tight enough to hurt, and reached out to tug lightly on Doyle's sleeve. "Sarge!" Ryan's voice cracked on the single word, but he forced the rest out. "Please double-check that badge. Just look at it again." It wasn't loud, but it landed like a flare in the dark. Doyle jerked his arm back as if the touch burned. "Don't tell me how to do my job." The words were a bark sharp enough to echo off the concrete walls. He never turned his head toward Ryan, never took his eyes off Nathan, as if conceding even a glance would weaken the hold he thought he had. Ryan froze where he stood. His hand hung in midair for a breath, then dropped to his side. The color drained from his face. The threat Doyle had once whispered, "Call anyone over my head, and you're done," in this precinct hung there like a ghost between them. A few feet away, Lieutenant Grace Miller had moved quietly to a side computer terminal. She said nothing, but her fingers worked with quick precision, tapping through secure records. The glow from the monitor lit her face in pale blue as she cross-checked the name Nathan Cole against the department's newest personnel files. Her eyes caught the entry almost immediately. A recent appointment stamped and verified, Police Commissioner Nathan Cole. The same silver emblem she had glimpsed on the table now matched every line on the screen. Grace's breath caught. For an instant, she just stared at the confirmation, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Then her brow tightened and she drew a slow breath, as if to steady the building tension that had already thickened to the density of smoke. Around them, the room itself seemed to brace. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to mark each second like a gavel. The rain on the window slowed to a rhythmic patter, perfectly out of sync with the rising pulse inside. Even the fluorescent hum wavered as though the lights knew something was about to give. Doyle leaned closer across the table, mistaking the silence for surrender. "You think keeping quiet makes you smart," he said, voice colder now. "It only makes me dig deeper." Nathan finally turned his head just enough to meet Doyle's eyes. He didn't speak. The smallest curve of composure crossed his face, something between patience and certainty, and then it was gone. That look was enough to shift the air. Ryan felt it too. He opened his mouth, then shut it, a silent plea flicking toward Grace. His eyes asked what his voice couldn't risk. "Please step in. End this before it breaks." Grace straightened, one hand still resting on the keyboard. She hadn't spoken yet, but the decision was already forming, solid and inevitable. The room waited with her. The silence became a wall, thick, pressurized, alive. It pressed on every chest, slowed every breath. The clock's steady tick-tick stretched each second until it felt like a countdown. No one had started, but everyone heard. Something was about to snap, and everyone in that cold, fluorescent room knew it. Doyle didn't, or he wouldn't admit it. He stayed locked on Nathan, convinced the quiet was his to break. The rest of us understood better. The silence wasn't empty. It was the sound of truth gathering its strength, just seconds from shattering the night. The silence finally cracked, clean and sharp like glass breaking in slow motion. Lieutenant Grace Miller stepped forward from the glow of the computer screen, her voice cutting through the hum of fluorescent lights and the hiss of rain on the windows. "Sergeant Doyle, stop. This man is Commissioner Nathan Cole." For a heartbeat, the room seemed to forget how to breathe. The clock on the wall stopped meaning anything. Every tick stretched into a void. Even the rain outside felt distant, as if it too was listening. Officer Ryan Bell staggered back a step. Color drained from his face until it matched the gray walls. The breath he'd been holding escaped in a hiss. His eyes flicked between Grace and Nathan, like he was trying to redraw the whole night in his head. Doyle turned stiffly, the movement almost mechanical. His pupils widened in disbelief. "What? Commissioner?" The word fell out of him like it didn't belong in his mouth. His right hand, the one that had gripped power so tightly all evening, trembled at his side. Grace didn't flinch. "You heard me. Commissioner Nathan Cole, appointed last week by the mayor's office. Every credential matches. You need to uncuff him. Now." The sentence landed heavier than any shout. For the first time since the stop, Nathan moved with purpose. He rose from the chair in a single calm motion. The cuffs rattled once, then settled. With deliberate grace, he brought his hands forward, twisted the chain, and with a click that sounded louder than Doyle's entire questioning, the cuffs opened. He set them on the table with a quiet finality. He didn't raise his voice. "This department needs more than badges," Nathan said, each word deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who had chosen silence until it became a weapon. "It needs conscience." No one spoke. The words didn't need an echo. They filled every corner of the room. One by one, other officers stepped closer from the hallway and adjacent desks drawn by the force of the moment. You could hear low murmurs, short breaths of astonishment and dawning recognition. A few exchanged uneasy glances. Others looked at Doyle with something sharper disappointment that cut deeper than anger. Doyle's mouth opened and closed, a man groping for footing on ground that no longer existed. He half turned toward Grace, then toward the door as if either direction might give him a script. None did. His earlier certainty, "I know what I'm doing," hung in the air like a lie he could no longer hide behind. Ryan finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. "Sir, I saw the badge earlier. I should have." He stopped himself, shame and relief twisting in equal measure. He straightened the decision to stand on the right side of the moment, settling in his shoulders. Nathan's gaze swept the room, resting briefly on Ryan, then Grace. It wasn't triumph. It was something steadier. A quiet expectation that the truth, now out in the open, demanded action from everyone present. Outside, a burst of thunder rolled over the roof, the night itself seeming to acknowledge what had just been said. The precinct no longer felt like the same place. The power in it had shifted silently but completely. What began as an ordinary stop on a rain-soaked street now stood revealed as something else entirely, a test of reckoning, a line drawn between authority as force and authority as integrity. The truth had been there all along, waiting under the weight of silence, until the right voice, Grace's, clear and unwavering, set it free. No one moved for a long suspended moment. The only sound was the slow, undeniable beat of consequence filling the room, promising that nothing about this night or this department would remain the same. For a long breath, no one moved. Then Sergeant Mark Doyle finally tried to speak, and the words stumbled out like loose bricks. I was just following procedure." It sounded small in the big echoing room. Even he seemed to hear how thin it was. Across the table, Nathan Cole didn't flinch. He let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to feel it, then answered with a voice as steady as a verdict. Procedure never meant prejudice. The sentence landed like a hammer. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Each syllable carried the weight of 1,000 nights like this one, nights where procedure was used to dress up fear and bias. The air itself seemed to contract around the truth of it. Lieutenant Grace Miller stepped forward. She had her clipboard now, the authority of the night shift flowing into every move. "Sergeant Doyle," she said, crisp and controlled, "by order of departmental policy, impending review, you are suspended effective immediately." Her voice left no room for argument. "Place your weapon and badge on the table." The sound of the word suspended felt heavier than any metal. Doyle's shoulders sagged. His hands, so quick on the gun hours earlier, now moved with reluctant weight. He unclipped his holster, laid the firearm down with a soft clunk, and set his badge beside it. The silver shield that once flashed with power looked suddenly dull under the fluorescent lights. Behind him, Officer Ryan Bell lowered his head. The struggle that had tied him in knots all night finally broke free. "Sir," he said, voice tight and thick, "I'm sorry for not stopping this sooner. I won't stay silent again." Those words didn't just confess. They committed. You could feel the shift in him like a door opening that had been nailed shut. Nathan turned slightly, meeting Ryan's eyes. He gave the faintest nod, not of victory, but of recognition. His look carried no anger, only a depth that spoke of long battles and a wider sickness than one sergeant's arrogance. It was as if he were saying, "This is bigger than us, but this is how it begins to heal." Doyle stood there, shoulders caved inward, staring at the table. Whatever fight he'd carried into the night had drained away. The badge and gun lay between them, like artifacts of a power that was already gone. No one spoke. Not Grace, not Ryan, not the officers gathering quietly near the doorway. The silence filled the room like a verdict of its own, a still heavy acknowledgement that something deeper than policy had been put on trial and found guilty. Even the ticking clock seemed to pause, as if the building itself understood that the real punishment wasn't paperwork or suspension. It was this moment of stripped authority witnessed by everyone who would remember it. Outside, rain kept pattering on the windows, steady and endless. Inside, the weight of consequence settled over every person in the room, a quiet, more powerful than any shout. Morning broke clean and bright over Riverton, as if the storm had wrung the night dry and left only clarity behind. By 8 o'clock, the top floor of police headquarters was filled. Commanders, precinct, captains, unit heads, faces drawn tight from too little sleep and too many questions. The heavy conference table gleamed under soft daylight, but the room buzzed with the weight of what had happened only hours earlier. Commissioner Nathan Cole stood at the head of the table. He looked rested in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. When he began, his voice was calm, yet carried the kind of authority that doesn't need volume. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," he said. "Last night wasn't an isolated incident. It was a mirror. And what we saw demands more than statements. It demands change." He laid out his plan with measured precision, each step like a stake driven into the ground. First, mandatory anti-bias and de-escalation training for every sworn officer and supervisor from rookies to chiefs. Second, independent oversight of use of force cases and traffic stops, so no badge could hide behind closed doors. Third, secure reporting channels for officers and civilians alike, anonymous, protected, untouchable by rank or politics. These reforms, Nathan said, aren't optional. They are the floor on which trust can stand. Around the table, a ripple of silence spread. Some captains took notes with careful pens. Others simply listened, the weight of the night before still sitting heavy on their shoulders. From midway down the table, Officer Ryan Bell rose. He stood straighter than he had in the precinct hours earlier, a young man whose voice now carried the steadiness of a decision made. "Last night taught me silence is complicity." He said, his words crisp in the bright room. "I choose better." The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was respect. Heads nodded. A few tapped the table softly in agreement. Beside him, Lieutenant Grace Miller added her own clear note. "Doing nothing is never neutral. We can't make that choice again." Her tone was firm, not defiant, a declaration of shared duty more than personal pride. Nathan let their words settle, his eyes moving around the table until they met each person's. "This is where accountability lives," he said. "Not in press releases, but in what we do next." Outside the conference room, the story was already running like wildfire. News outlets carried footage of the arrest and the reversal. Headlines spoke of a commissioner testing his own force and exposing a hidden fracture. Community leaders called for nationwide reform. Messages of support flooded City Hall. What began as a midnight traffic stop had become a national conversation about power race and the meaning of justice. Nathan closed the meeting with a single line that seemed to ring against the glass walls long after he left the room. "We don't need louder sirens. We need deeper justice." No one rushed to leave. For a moment, the room held its breath, the morning sun laying clean light across faces that understood something had shifted for the department, for the city, and maybe for the country watching. Late that afternoon, long after the emergency meetings and the ringing of newsroom phones, Commissioner Nathan Cole walked back to the street where it had all begun. The storm had rinsed the city clean. Sunlight slid across the wet pavement, catching in small silver puddles that still remembered the night's downpour. The scent of rain mixed with warm asphalt, soft, almost sweet after the hard hours before. A few neighbors lingered on stoops and corners, the same faces who had held up phones beneath last night's sirens. They saw him and paused. No one rushed forward, no one called his name. Instead, heads dipped in quiet respect, a wordless recognition of what had happened here. Their eyes followed him with something gentler than applause, something steadier, trust. Nathan stopped at the very patch of sidewalk where the cruiser's lights had once painted him in red and blue. The memory came back whole, the sharp command to turn around the cuffs, the cold weight of accusation. But now the place felt different, as though the street itself had exhaled. In that stillness, he heard it again, the voice that had anchored him through every long night. "Justice isn't loud, but it never misses." Only this time it wasn't a reminder. It was a fact fulfilled. He let the words settle, felt their truth reach deeper than the concrete beneath his shoes. A small smile touched his face, neither victory nor relief, more like the quiet joy of keeping a promise. Then he moved on. No entourage, no cameras, just the measured stride of a man at peace with the weight he carried and the work still to come. He slipped into the flow of pedestrians heading home, the sun catching the edges of his gray suit until it looked almost gold. From across the avenue, I watched until the crowd folded around him, and he became part of the ordinary city he served. The last thing I saw was his figure framed in warm light, steady and unhurried, as if the day itself had chosen him as its closing image. That is how the story ends, not with fanfare, but with a man walking forward beneath a bright sky, proof that quiet courage can outlast the loudest night. What a powerful journey this night became a reminder that true justice doesn't need to shout to be heard. Nathan's quiet strength showed that courage can be steady, and that real reform begins when silence carries truth instead of fear. If this story moved you, please like the video and share it with friends and family. So, Its message of dignity and change can reach even further. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more meaningful stories. Like this one, your support is what inspires our team to keep creating heartfelt, high-quality content. Let's keep this light of justice alive together.